I'd like to congratulate the Gippsland Campdrafting Association for 40 successful years of camp drafting. 40 years ago, a small group of men and women got together and had a great idea. And for that, our current 375 members are truly grateful. We've seen many changes over the years, but our friendly rural atmosphere remains the same. It's this atmosphere and skill of drafting cattle that is uniquely to camp drafting. In the GCA, we now see 3 generations of families, still friends, still riding, and still passionate about their camp drafting. A big thank you to the 40th Anniversary Committee. It is enthusiastic people like yourselves that has made the GCA the success it is today.
The Stock Horse Society wasn't here when we started camp.
Right.
And I had an idea that we decided that it was going to be a Stock Horse Society the night that we decided we were formed a camp. I may be wrong, that's what my memory of it is.
No,
it wasn't because of the Stock Horse Society. Ron Connolly and John Cates and Krista and a few people, because I used to run the horse arts. And they were run a lot different to what they are now, because we used to have, we'd never have less than 100 horses, and we had up to 239 one day. We used to have a lot of horses. A lot of them used to come from home here. We used to have the buck runners, and there was 2 Brumby running outfits at Arneo, the buck runners. I can't remember who the other one was. And they used to send down 30 or 40 each every sale. Anyway, the people I've just mentioned, they at a horse sale, they said, well, we'll have a public meeting. I think we might have decided that we did before. We'll have a public meeting. We had a public meeting in the commercial hotel, and I chaired the meeting, and to start it off, and then Ron Conley was elected the first president. And I think Vern Burke was the first secretary. I'm not sure whether she was or not. Anyway, we went on from there. There was only a few of us at the meeting, I suppose there might have been a dozen. And we went on from there, and we just seemed to, the next thing Les White said, well, you can use my White Acres, you can use that paddock, build a yard out there. They had a few working bees, got some cattle, had a few camp drafts, and it was very low key. I mean, I was at a camp draft. I've only been to one since the 70s, actually. I went to one at Traralgon, and I just watched the way they ran it, and I was thinking about the way we used to run it, and they'd have 3 people waiting to start, and if you weren't there when you start came, bang, went the whip. You were out. But when they first started, they'd be saying, hey, come over here, it's your turn next. And there'd be someone who, oh, I just got to get this, or I just got to get that. And there'd be, sometimes there'd be 5 minutes between runs because they're waiting for someone to put the saddle on their horse even. You know, it was just so low key to compare with today. But there were so few people doing it too, I suppose that's what. Anyway, that, you know, it went on then, and then we sort of went, they had one at Stony Creek, we went down there, they used to have them at Warrigal Creek, and I think they still do. I can't think. We went up to Nimini. A lot of us went up to Nimini one year. Yeah. I think did they have one up in maybe a valley somewhere? We were virtually in it until the tough times came to cattle, and I went out of cattle and went building houses. Yeah. And I spent 7 years building houses, and I didn't have much to do with the rural industry at all. And that's when we got out of it, probably from the sort of late 70s. And then I remember when we were in it, it wasn't easy to get cattle, but it wasn't that hard to get them. And then, of course, we had the cattle crash in the 70s, and it was, you know, cattle weren't any, so it didn't matter if they get killed at the camp after you shot them and you got $10 from the government. Yeah. I mean, you sort of, I think it was easy to get cattle then. And then the cattle came good, and it got harder to get cattle. I don't know what it's like now. But That's my memories of it. And the reason is, I'll repeat again now, the only reason that probably we got into it is I thought that this is a good thing for the children to have a go at, rather than go and waste thousands of dollars on saddles and clothing to be in a pony club that should be a thing for fun, not for that sort of thing, you know, whoever looks the best. I just remember it as being, it was a really good, fun thing to be in, you know. Everybody was, there was no real animosity or, you know, it was just a really good crowd of people. They were really friendly, good people, and anyone that came from away always used to comment on, you know, what a great atmosphere it was around our camp drafts, and that's what I remember. I don't remember any particular instance that I could say, well, that was... I remember a couple of instances that weren't that nice, but I'm not going to bring them up. Oh, excellent. It was really a great thing. Yeah, it was fantastic. Yeah, because the children all had a run, and the adults could come and have a run, and you didn't, you know, it didn't matter what sort of a scraggy old horse you had, or your gear, or nobody worried about that sort of thing. It was just people competing and enjoying themselves. We had two. We had a horse that Jenny used to ride was Silver Lead, that she won the Gippsland Championship on. He was my Freddie boy, that old Jim Hodge used to stand at W Tree. He got a lot of good ponies throughout Gippsland. And Andrew's horse, Copper Top, we bred out of a half-hour meal we bought off the faithful with the really interesting face, lived-in face, as someone described him one day. Bill Faithful. Yep. We bought off him, and and then we bred it. It was by Laurentis, and there was a few good ponies about by Laurentis then. Reese Morris had a couple. Yeah. Yeah, that's the horses we had that we used. We had others other ponies that they did try occasionally, but they were the two that were pretty good, pretty handy. I don't remember which was the biggest. Probably here, I think. Yeah. But I think Warrigal Creek was pretty big.
Yeah, it was actually.
Yeah. I got no wood and went a toss-up, I reckon, between Warrigal Creek and here. Oh, well, as I say, the only one I've been to, I was really impressed with the organisation. You know, the way they just sort of one's out and one's in, and there's no waiting. And if you're not there, you get cracked off. I mean, yes. It was just, you know, that could have happened in the old days. You know, they just everybody. Well, it was just a low key event. You know, there was an odd one that was pretty serious. About used to get a bit uptight about some things weren't run away they should be run, but most of the people just said, "Oh, this is great fun."
Yeah, yeah, which is what I guess.
And that's how I took it. You know, I just took it as well. Yeah. And it was a good social day to go and see a few people you haven't seen for a while with your same interests. It was excellent. Oh no, I mean everybody give you a few tips, but when you're as hopeless as I am, it didn't make much difference to me. But I always thought that probably the best bloke to have a yarn that was Ron. Yeah. You know, because he's so good at everything he does. He's just a good bloke. But I don't remember being on that committee. I probably was, but because I used to be involved in everything that went on. Yes. But I don't remember it. I'll tell you a thing that I did think of before. The first night, when excuse me, when we were deciding on our rules and what we were going to do, they brought up the subject of a disputes committee. They said, now we're going to have a disputes committee. And this is one of the things that I really jumped in on. I said, that will not happen if I've got anything to do with this. Yeah. Because if you have disputes committees, you'll have disputes. If you don't have a disputes committee, you won't have a dispute. Yes. And I don't know if they've got one now, but I hope they have it. I can't stress enough what a great, friendly sport it was to be involved in. I think and the only reason that we sort of drifted out of it was financial, because we lost a lot of money when the cap crash came. Yeah. And I got into building houses and got out of the rural industry, and we just didn't get back into it. Yeah. And I went to it was the the championships. They held them at Roma.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was amazing because their standard was about, well, it was a sort of a Queensland Championship or something. You'd expect it to be, but their organisation and their standard and the horses they had
Yeah.
were just that far in front of what we were using, what was happening here. It wasn't funny, but from what I saw at Traralgon that day,
Yes.
the horses
Yeah,
were
they're-
some very good horses competing at
Yeah,
Traralgon.
well,
that day.
Alan Sheridan was the instigator of the first meeting of the stock horses.
Yeah.
And we held that after a horse sale. He was heavily involved with the horse sale. He was the agent. The first meeting was held at Commercial Hotel, I think. And Alistair Irving was the first president of the stock horse, and I was vice president. I'm not sure who was secretary, but I know Sue White was secretary earlier on. It came up that what are we going to do for these stock horses? How are we going to show them? Whether we go showing them and leading them round and perhaps riding them round. The other suggestion I made that we get involved with the camp drafting. Alistair had been involved with camp drafting up in the Hunter Valley, so he had a fair grounding there. From there, the only thing I wasn't involved with the camp draft meetings, though I did go to some, but my first recollection of actual camp drafting was at Lettuce White's White Acres, and I'm not sure whether it was the first actual camp draft or it was the second. If it wasn't the first, it was the second. I ran second on a mare called Sir Light. She was Lady Light, she was called, and she was by a horse called Sir Light, which was a popular breed that from the Monero up on Nimitabel, the Williams family had them. So. And one of the reasons why I got involved was we were doing cattle work and riding horses quite often, and we're also chasing horses in the bush and that sort of thing. So this followed on. The camp drafting seemed to fit into our lifestyle at that stage. Yeah, well, I had some fairly handy horses in the early days. Mind you, it was a lot easier to win a draft in those days than what it is now. We would be having maybe 40 or 50 in an event, the maiden and the novice, and the open was smaller again. Of course, nowadays you're getting up to 200 and 300 in an event, so it's much different. Yes, in those days I had a little roan horse. He was by Gundy Bruce, who Alistair, Ron and myself were involved with. We owned him jointly. Yeah, this little horse, I call him Smoky Joe, is a little roan horse. I was at Ensay at a draft. It'd be pretty early on. Didn't do any good in the maiden. I think I ran a place in the novice, and of course in those days you'd go in everything just to fill in the program, and anyhow I ended up winning the open. Now that's not very much you could say, but the horses I beat were LTA ran second with Jimmy Raymond Matson, who was riding him, and the other horse was Trapper, who what's Needles, so I don't remember his name now, just forgotten. Anyhow,
Clive
he
Elliott.
did. Yeah, Needle, Clive Elliott it was, who owned Trapper, and he ran third. So yeah, that wasn't a bad effort for a maiden horse, winning the open, and he went on to win other opens, that horse. So he was a pretty handy horse. Favourite drafts? they were all pretty interesting to me. I liked Tinnamungi. It was sort of the local draft that I was involved with. I had a good day down at Bell's Point, down at Tarwin Lower, I think it is, at Landy's place. I had a horse called Rasputin that I'd won a maiden on at Nimity Bell not long before. And I think Ron took my horses down. Ron Connolly took my horses to Bell's Point, and I finished up winning the Open down there on him. So that was a nice spot. You could look out to the sea, I think, and from the arena. Not really, no. I think there wasn't a lot of people around who right up there into drafting. We were all more or less, as we're talking in the 73, 74, 75, we're all sort of battling away. I don't think so. What I found out, you had to have plenty of work in your horses to get them, worked down. And I suppose the same applies today, that you have to work your horses. The only thing is nowadays the horses are specially trained, they're a lot better trained. We didn't know that much about training horses those days. We just used to ride them and hope for the best, I suppose. Well, I still draft, and I won't see 71 again. There's a big difference. As I said earlier, in the early drafts, 40 or 50 in an event was quite a strong event right in the early days, but then it gradually built. But nowadays, it's very competitive. It's, you want a bit of luck going with you. You want to have the right beast sort of to go round. There's plenty of horses that can win a draft, but they've only got to strike the right beast and have the rider do the right thing on them. But it's it's definitely very hard to win a draft these days. I only go to, I think I went to 2 last year, probably only go to 2 or 3 this year. I don't travel much nowadays, but some people travel, which is a great thing, and there's a great social thing about the drafting. I think some people even go just for the social side, which I'm beginning to think looks pretty good. Oh yes, in the early days we always had 2 judges, and I think that probably worked all right while we were learning and getting set up and getting drafts going, but eventually we went back to the one system, and that seems to work well. There was, some... it just involves another person to run a draft. So you've got 2 judges, and they take a lot of running these drafts. There's a lot of people put in, and the less work you have for the competitors and those who are helping, the better. There was no, when we started off, and I don't know when it finished, but the grounds weren't ploughed, and we were often camp drafting through the summer on pretty hard ground. You could hear the horses' feet clattering underneath you, and there was an odd horse got hurt, hurt themselves because of that. And I'm sure when there was fall, so people were getting hurt more. Now the grounds are ploughed, and you don't see many bad accidents with ploughed grounds. They seem to get into the ground and hold their ground, the horses. And when people do come off, they don't get those injuries that were around when unploughed.
Well, we formed a stock horse branch, and anyway, that was gone. We had a committee to run that. And Ed Gibson was the one that brought it up, and he said, "Now, what are we going to do with these horses?" Him and Gerald Entry, I think it was. I reckon we needed something to do with them when we had them registered. So that's what Ian Gibson suggested a camp draft association. I thought it was a silly idea. I thought why can't the stock horse branch do it? But I'm glad it didn't go that way now. So he done the thinking, the working out, and Alan Sheridan done the work, I think, to get the first meeting going. Yeah, it was just going because just before then, we'd been to the second meeting of the SCA at Gippsland Campdrafting, and they put Barry Burke and I on the committee. And we had a talk about when we were going to start this Gippsland Association. We thought, well, we better not take on a major job at it. We might be in trouble with the other association. And they wanted me to be president for start, and that's why I didn't. Anyway, Alan Wallace stepped up and done it, took it, and he done a real good job. I don't know, we thought they were all pretty big, but none of them were very big really, when you think about them. Get 20 or 30 in the open draft. Oh, I don't know, watching Terry and Chris all at Malden and Mansfield when they come down, Tumut they used to come to. Oh, plenty of blokes, Kenny Webb and Lexi Webb. Rossi Webb, the bloke who got killed, he was the best of them all. Fantastic. Gordon Day was a great camp drafter. Oh, I wouldn't have a clue. There's a lot of good horses, and I wouldn't want to say one was better than the other. Terry Hall and them those blokes, they used to bring down a truckload of good horses, miles better than any of ours. But I wouldn't know.
Not Monterey.
He was the best horse I ever had.
That's what I'm saying, your best horse that you ever
Oh
had.
yeah, he was the best horse by a long way.
Yeah. And with the horses, like it seemed to me that at the start everyone just had the horses that they did everything with. They weren't,
Oh yeah, well,
you know,
you
just
look at
any
that
old nag.
photo of Jack O'Neill on Kung Fu. Well, I couldn't work out why poor old Jack ever put a saddle and bridle on the mongrel of a thing. But he won a few drafts on him. So you took your old stock horse out of the paddock, no training, not much idea, and the riders never had much idea. We went along, and a few of the educated horses, like Patsy had show jumpers, and he'd ride a couple of them. A couple of these real good show jumpers, they were real good camp drafters. Wallaroo, I forget what he called them.
Yeah.
Kangaroo, they were terrific camp draft horses. But they were show jumpers, and they'd been educated and pretty smart. Oh, that was at Whiteacres draft one day. Auntie Jack, you couldn't carry or rattle anything on him. You could rattle a bit of plastic or get a bottle of water on the back of him, he'd take off. And, anyway, Porky had to judge something. I forget what it was. One of the drafts. Didn't have well, they all had their own horses, but they didn't want to judge on them because I think they couldn't crack a whip on them. Anyway, here, take this one, Porky. Now, whatever you do, don't do anything. Don't rattle anything or shake anything. Just sit on him quietly. So Porky gets up there sitting out in front of the camp and puts a cigarette in his mouth and gets the box of matches out and shook them like that. And oh, he'd buck round the circle. He always come back to the truck. He took off. I tied him to the front of the camp at Woodside one day, and he took off, and we only had flags around the thing then. I was helping, what's his name, draft some cattle, and he pulled back and took off and went straight through these flags, and he took off bucking with about 50 yards of flags and round through the trucks back to our camp, and you kids were all sitting around the fire, and he jumped clean over the fire, and you kids and everything with about 50 feet of flags hanging on behind him. No, they were just hard football grounds. Like, I saw several horses break their leg just galloping across the ground. You know, they were mostly older horses, but they just broke their leg on the ground. It was that hard.
Yeah. And so you didn't have, like we build the arena which is now much
No,
smaller.
no arena.
And so were there some people out the back making sure the cattle didn't nick off?
Sometimes they had vehicles around them. The NAFTA show used to have a draft, and we all had to put our trucks around for an arena. The cattle would duck under them sometimes. Ricky Morgan used to run the drafts at Holocaust Club, I think, down at Sale, down where the caravan park is now, on the side of the road. No fences. They put up a few panels for a yard, put the cattle in there, and you'd have your run, and then you'd have to bring the steer back and put it straight back in the back of the yard for the mob. They're all in together. The road's there with vehicles going down the side.
So redrafting the same cattle?
No,
Oh.
I don't know whether they put paint on them when they come in the yard. I think they were supposed to, but they didn't always do it. But it's Can River one time, Owen Waller won the maiden on a brindle heifer. Anyway, the novice was next, and Barry Burke and I were getting cattle in, and this brindle heifer was with the cattle outside, and I was galloping around, so we put it in the yard. We got in the cattle and come in the yard in the novice just before Owen rode in the yard. And I said, "There's your brindle heifer there, Owen." Oh, he said, "I'll have to take it again, won't I?" He took it, and I think he won the novice with it too.
Oh, well, good.
But there was no finals in those days, or very rarely. Yeah, no, mostly Gippsland, the Campdrafting Association ran them, because we'd often have to go down to South Gippsland. Ronald Rogers and I used to go down there. We'd have to cart the yards from Warrigal Creek and set them up, and they'd bring the cattle in, and then after it was finished, we'd have to clean up and pull the yards down, load them on the truck and take them back to Warrigal Creek. And it was nearly always Ronald Rogers and I were left there. The other people would have been home, had their tea, and probably some of them in bed before we left.
Yeah.
Oh, well, the ploughed grounds are the best thing, because every year, over the whole of the country, there was at least 2 or 3 people got killed every year,
Yeah.
camp driving.
And what about like the, the friendliness of it? Because
It's still the same. Yeah, there was a bit of fierce competition those days, the same as there is now. But everyone was pretty good friends.
Why I sort of supported the camp draft, because I was keen on having horse sports and horsemanship. I was mainly polo cross, and when this started up, we thought it was good to people that weren't interested in a team sport that could do their individuals, and it sounded fitting for this district, as a lot of horses were still being used at that time, and it started from there. And then we're looking for a ground. The first ground that we worked on was at Whiteacres at the Lindow Road, and as far as I remember, that was our first draft officially was out there, and we had several years there. It was very wet. One year we had to cart a lot of sawdust in there to stop the cattle disappearing in the bog holes. And then I was on the committee of management of the racecourse in about 1972, which was unofficial at the time. It hadn't even formed out at the racecourse, and we were looking to get everybody involved, and I put it up for the camp draft to have an area at the racecourse, and we got a map with the initial drawn up of where the camp draft was to go, and in 74 the official opening of the racecourse was taken on, and the brother and I and other members were working on the ground. I remember one night they were digging stumps out at about 9:30 at night with a tractor on the existing camp draft ground, and then we pegged out the yards, and Ronald Rogers organised the sawn timber from Buchan to come down. Owen Waller cut posts out at his property at Glen Ullerdale and carted in, and working bee we put them up. and then we were going to have a rodeo shoot alongside, but that got scrapped. As all the bodies that were using the area are entitled to have reps on the committee management, there was only 9 members allowed, and I represent the Polo Cross Club and the Campdraft Association at the time for just on 33 years until the Polo Cross disbanded, and we got some other members in, and then prior to that time the Southern Camp Drafters, as we were affiliated with, changed over to the stock horse for running the draft then, and it went on through the stock horse as it is now. Occasionally I competed, but mainly I was involved with judging. Somebody dobbed me in to do judging, and I seemed to do most of the judging round, probably because they were very short of judges, and for obvious reasons. And everybody various grounds around areas that had cricket pitches, they were on ovals and that, and then the judges had to work out a course dodging the cricket pitches, which at times were very difficult. The arena fences were non-existent in a lot of places. It was only as we pointed out, we've had bunting, and some areas had hessian, and didn't always work very successful. But it all added to the
excitement of the
events, I guess.
Probably the first that I ever heard about camp drafting was about when I was 14. Mum and Dad gave me a book for Christmas called Australia Astride, and it was, I just forget, someone wrote the book, but it was about all different horse sports in Australia. I had a big write up on camp drafting. Well, that's the first time I'd even heard of camp drafting. So ever after that, whatever I could hear or find out about it, I just thought it was something out of this world. And yeah, and in years to come, we'll started here in Gippsland, or going to get started, so I got involved with it there, and I suppose the rest is history. But there's some you have said we started off at White Acres, and I was involved with help building the yards out there, and it was in about November, and we had a hell of a thunderstorm one lunch, or would have been lunchtime or thereabouts. So anyway, we had lunch in the hay shed over there, went in there and sheltered, and came out after lunch to start work again, and this big pool of water in the yards, where we were building the yards, and it was all murky, you couldn't see the holes, and Ken had his gumboots on, and he was wandering around on it to see what to do, and next thing Ken went down a post hole. I think it was the gate, would have been one of the gate posts. He was down to his waist in this hole, and he was carrying on like a grizzly bear. No, we all walked around him. No one was going to help pull him out, as we knew we'd get pulled in. But anyway, by the time he got himself out, well, he had settled down. No one got attacked, but it was it was fairly humorous. But also, I can remember at other times out there, I think it was working bees. We did working bees there. It might have been after that day we had a meeting out there in the hay shed. I think Peter was there. I'm pretty sure he was, but there's the Kevin Luxfords and the Gerald Ventrys and all those. I think Patchy was there and your dad was there, and but we had one meeting there in what was the working bee in the hay shed, and yes, well, that ground, well, there was we had our pegs, and it was up to judge how wide you went, and very hard ground. If you went too far, you ended up in a lake at the other end of it, and look, it was, well, as said before, a lot of our grounds were a bit ordinary, but it was probably one of the better ones, and well, it was good enough for people to fall in love with camp drafting and wanted to keep going. I think we'd had 1 or 2 drafts, and then Jimmy Ramage came across and gave a school, and helped us as much as he could. And then I think our next school that I can remember, well, I think that was in 73, and then in 74 it was, I think, in about, it was about the middle of June in 74, John Stanton came down and ran a school. He had a couple of those good horses, Tarzan and another horse, Dodge, Stanton Stud Dodge, yes. He came down with those 2 horses, and yeah, we thought they were best horses we'd ever seen. And we had drafted, we had them at Sale, I think Peter said it might have been down on the river. Then we might have even one on the arena. I'm not sure, their showground arena. We also had at Mafra, we had Sunday after the Mafra show. And I know, I was president then, and went down the day before and to help get cattle in, and I can remember going out to Bundalagua the morning of a draft and walking about 80 bullocks in from right out there to the old primary school. And also I can remember getting those cattle out. There was 2 people, Andrew Pennyfather and Alistair Irvine, and no one they didn't have dogs, so I had 1 dog with me, which was probably the best dog I ever had, Paddy. And anyway, we went to get the cattle out, and Andrew Pennyfather said, "Keep that dog out of the way. We don't want him just getting right out of the way." So he's a very obedient dog, and he was in behind me all the time. And we had 3 goes of getting the cattle out, and we couldn't get them out on the road. And I said, well, they threw their hands up and said, "What are we going to do?" And I said, "We'll use the dog." I believe in less than 5 minutes those cattle are out on the road. And I can remember that quite clearly. And I can remember another morning out at White Acres. It was, if you know, when Lynn Buttwright's birthday is, we could work it out. We came into her 21st, the Saturday night of the draft, and we had to get cattle in the next morning, and I had Paddy with me, and he camped in the back of the ute, and I did have too much to drink, and I was asleep in the front of the ute, and a couple of fellas thought they'd come over and play a practical joke and to wake me up, but I didn't know anything about it. They all said, well, when your dog stood up and sort of looked up, and they decided that was the end of the practical joke. They backed away. Look, I enjoyed all my horses. I had 1 horse, Tarzan. He wasn't probably a top camp drafter. I had a bit of fun with him. He's a great eventer and everything, all around horse. Bellette, she was very good. Belita was quite good. I had a grey mare flight, and then Juliet and Jet, they were all sort of handy horses in their own era, sort of thing. I think I thought they were all Jets. And Cavalier, I can't forget him. He was a very handy little horse, only small but very good. And but Jet probably, yeah, he had as much potential as any horse, I think. The stallion we lost, the last horse I sort of drafted, and yeah, they're all good horses around the farm as well. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been about. So yeah. Not really. I listened and looked at the good riders as much as I could. I knew nothing. When we started, of course, we knew nothing. Like I say, Jimmy Ramage came, John Stanton came, Rossi Clark came. You just tried to pick the eyes out of what they said. And also you watch the top riders, operators, and how they went and tried to pick ideas out of the people. But I'd say with the influence of drafting, probably include the Stock Horse Society too. But between the two of them, it's just lifted the standard of the horse in Victoria or Gippsland as well. And like the better riders always had a handy horse or two, but then the people that came in that didn't know a lot about riding, or there's a heck of a difference between the standard of the good horses and those horses, and then the influence of the northern horses. Well, it's just unbelievable how it's lifted the quality and the standard of the horse, and also then that lifted the standard of the riding. And it's just so many good riders and so many good horses there these days. And of course the juniors that came along too, they put it together very early with their experience so young, and it's just turned out that we've got so many good horses and good riders in this area now that the tops can hold their head up amongst anywhere they go in Australia. They can be up with the best of them, some of them. So yeah, I think it's been a great thing to happen as for sporting wise. And
we're into. It started breeding horses and always was in the district droving, mainly in the mountains, and it just appealed, chasing cattle round pegs, I suppose. Anything to do with horses, cattle, and those people that followed it was a big attraction. And it started with a meeting at St Andrew's Hall. I think it was after a stock horse meeting that we got together and started the Eastern Campdraft Association. Probably the main one to start with was the group that Stan Idle had to do with, which was Gerald Bentry, Ken Howlett. There'd be two of the main ones, and then there was the likes of the next younger ones down, myself, Krista, Alan Sheridan was there from the start, Ron Conley. There's probably a few I can't think of off the top of my head, but certainly Stan Idle was one of the main ones. He'd had a lot to do with camp drafting up on the border. Ian Gibson had done some too. He was another one right from the start. He'd done a bit of drafting. Ricky Morgan from Sale had done a bit of drafting. Yeah, they were the main ones. But if I had to put one man that had a lot of push from the start, it was Stan Idle. Yes, yeah. Once we got together, there was really no stopping us.
No.
Early on, Ross Clark came down and ran a school, and I thought he was very good. We took up a lot of what he had to say. Probably Stan Idle, because he'd done it and knew what to do and used to say to us this and that. He's a bit blunt, but he was to the point. And, yeah, I think Stan Idle probably, because he was the only one of us that had done a fair bit of it.
Yeah.
No, I didn't. Only a few years. I did judge for many years,
Yeah.
but I had a lend of a horse early on, a pretty good horse that from Ensay that Jackie Cruz had by the name of Powell, and he was a good novelty horse and was quite a handy drafting horse. Won a novice on him and got into should have won the opened the tumult on him and didn't, stuffed up. But no, I did a lot of judging. Yeah. Afterwards, went back to the couldn't afford the time really. Things were too hectic at home. Couldn't afford the time. We used to disappear for 3 or 4 days, and it was too much time away. And but I did a lot of judging. for quite a few years. Pal was the best horse I had, the fella of Jackie Cruises, and I did not on my own. I didn't. Because at that stage I was droving, and I used to ride all the orangutans around the district, anything that I could get hold of. Yeah, so they weren't. A lot of them weren't up to camp drafting. Probably a couple of the ones that really stand out were the mountain drafts, like Inamungi, Buchan. Had some great times at Buchan, a couple of drafts at Buchan, and Cabanandra. Yeah, good days and nights, and long nights. Yeah, great get-togethers. No, they're not. No, they're. Amanda, my daughter, is. I shouldn't say that. She is. She's only just started the last year or two, and yeah, very keen on breeding the horses and drafting. Yeah, her and her partner both. She's right into it. Yeah. And still got some of the old horses that I bred, the Chan horses. Oh yeah, well, Rossi Clark couldn't believe it. We just drafted out in open paddocks. He said, "How the hell do you expect to hold cattle out in there?" I said, "Well, we didn't know what he meant, and we hadn't seen I think the only oval we got on was probably Sale. There used to be a bit of a show draft there, it was just for a few invited. Other than that, we just drafted out in the open paddocks. Then we started putting flags around. The biggest difference nowadays, as compared to when we started, was we just drafted into open paddocks. Didn't even have any boundaries at all, so to speak. So the beast come out the gate and just saw a paddock out in front. At White Acres it was probably 20 acres. Up at Buchan it was the same. In Inamungi it was the same. And then we got flags. We used to have to run the flags round. That was supposed to turn them. Well, sometimes it did and sometimes it didn't, but it did balk a lot of them. Yeah, Rossi Clark couldn't believe that we didn't draft in arenas, and when he came down to run a school, that would be one of the biggest differences. And there's a lot more time put into it now. Like, we just chased a cow in our ordinary work, and now the work that I remember Stan Ivel always said we didn't put enough time into our horses, and we didn't prepare them. He was always out he worked with Ken Howlett, and he was always out exercising Ken's nearly every morning, and we didn't know what that was all about. We just got them out of the paddock and chased the cow, drafted, so to speak. Yeah, there's more good ones now. They still tail off. So yeah, I think the best back then would still would hold their own now. I'm sure of that. You know, I know as you get further north, you know, the quality gets better. There's more good ones, and there always was. But no, there was fellas about then that would hold their own now. Yeah. Oh, there was some big nights, and there was one night at Buchan after the draft. It was hilarious, really. There was quite like the Woodgates, the Ventrys, the Rogers, plus the locals, the Ken Howletts and etc. were all there, and it was an hilarious night. I can't remember all the things that went on, but from being chased by wild bulls to riding buck jumpers to doing everything, and everybody rolling around laughing. We had at about 2 o'clock in the morning, we all had to stitch from laughing. I can remember that, lying around, rolling around with laughter.
And you were our first GCA president, or
That's
Eastern
right.
Camp Drafting president. How long did you stay in that role for?
Only a year. Might have been 2 years. Not long anyway. Yeah, I ended up. Yeah, I went to Queensland working for a while, and over a while. I can't even think who took over. Ken, I think. Ken Howlett took over. Yeah. And then I came back into it again later. Yeah.
If anyone that knew me knew I was always keen on horses and that, and the camp draft started after we lost Rossi Webb and the GCA. The SCA started, and Ronnie Connolly, Owen Miller and I went to the very first meeting they had when they formed the SCA, and next year we was made president, and then we were put on as directors from the eastern end, sort of the Gippsland end, the three of us, and that's how I stayed interested. And then we got our drafts going down there. Talked to Lowen, Waller and Sue White were good friends, and they talked and they said, well, if you want someone or somewhere to run around, what's wrong with Whiteacres? There's a yard there and I've got cattle. Well, that started our first little one, and then Owen and Krista brought cattle in, built it up, and we had some pretty good drafts there. And the bigger draft we had, we were actually out enlarging the camp. That's, you can do what you like. And we made a bigger camp. We only just had a yard. We made a bigger camp, and we're all there. And I think there's 10 of us there to working bee, and all talking about how successful it was and what we're going to do. And Ronnie Connolly said, well, I know I can get 600 one-line cattle. We goggled the mine, 600, a lot of cattle. And we can run it at Hinamanchi. Well, what are we going to do for money? And I forget now, but I think we had less than $300 in the bank. So I said, well, we've got 600 head of cattle, it's a big draft, we'll advertise it well, and we want to put up some pretty fair prize money. So I said, I suggest that we guarantee $50 each. That's $500. Well, the arguments that started then. We can't afford to give. I said, I didn't say give it, I said guarantee it. Surely to goodness we'll get someone there. And if you have a look at what we made on the entries here, we got about $200 for battery and entries. So that's only 300 left. Then eventually they got through their heads. Ron Connolly understood what I meant. He said, yeah, and there's a few that did. So Kevin Luxford and I think it was Ken Allen asked could they split it and give 25 each. I said you can get another 3 and give $10 each if you have to. And that was how we got the money up to start. We didn't have the money, we guaranteed it. Well then, Omeo, Billy Smith from Dubbo, called it horse stud, Omeo stock horse stud, and he saw the advertisement and that, God, I have to go down to this Omeo, he'd never been there, with the same name as his horse stud, and he got some mates. We couldn't believe the amount of people that turned up that we'd never seen and never heard of. They came from Bateman's Bay, which was Warren Clark, Omeo, and Billy Smith's mates came from further over towards Tamworth, and they all brought horses. And then there's the local horses, all the Tumut horses and so on. And it was a massive day. And we had about $700 in entries, and they were still coming in.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was the very first one. And I was the only one that entered in the open draft out of all the, down there. They said all the Billy Smith won it, yes, and then won the cutout. Yeah. And it was a very, very clever cutout. And he told me afterwards that the mare was never the same afterwards. Yeah. But he had never he'd been in mountain country, he said. But he was that frightened going up the mountain. He wouldn't come back down. Sonny Roots drove his truck back for him. He was going to go around through Melbourne. And he said to me after, I was talking to him in Dubbo one day, and he said, talk about these, someone said about mountains. He said, you blokes have never seen anything about mountains. He said, ask this bloke, not me. And he said he was petrified coming back down the mountain. Those quite had a lot to do with organising the one in Vanstaff. Well then, they moved from Whiteacres into the new show arena,
Yeah.
and I went to that opening of that, and I didn't even hear the draft that we had. I think it's a marvellous sport. There's so much skill learned since we started on training your horses, plus training the riders. And I do think the quarter horse people have taught us a lot about working the horse in the camp. And I don't mind saying that. Horse called Minstrel. It was only, well, I had two. He was my main horse, and I think I won the Gippsland Championship 3 times with him. And I had another mare that belonged to my brother Tom, and I got her out of the maiden class into the novice class, and that was about it. Our son rode, and he had a pony. He used to go drafting after he left home at all. He went rodeoing. Yeah, more excitement.
Yes.
He finished up a first division bull rider and a first division saddle rider, so he proved he could do what he wanted to do.
Yeah.
Then gave it away. Observing at Hinnamunchi helped me a lot, and but no, I had no locals, but I reckon I knew as much about horses as they did, or horsemanship. I always enjoyed going to Hinnamunchi. Didn't do a lot, apart from dance, I'd sail. I went down South Gippsland to a couple and done no good at all. And somewhere there was a creek there, and they were walking across the creek on a pole. Some of the drafters, their horses were on one side and they were been over to the bar or something on the other side. I don't know what it was. And Charles Conley was only a little fella. And he could see Sonny Roots coming tiptoe, and he threw a stone in the water. And right, Sonny, and in he went, wet to the knees.
Yes.
That's the funny thing there. There's a couple of others. Sonny never ever forgave him for it. Ken Howlett, it wasn't funny. Ken had a few beers and someone crossed him, or he'd fight him. Which was not good fun.
No.
He'd be right 10 minutes later. He and Alistair Irving was one of those South Gippsland drafts, and Ken was going to Alistair's to stop the night, I think. And Alistair got out the gate to open the gate, and Ken hit him. And anyway, they boxed on. And Ken threw the hands up there. That's enough, that's enough. He said, I thought you were a bit of a sook, but you can box all right. Alistair said, well, you made that bugger. Rasputin.
Yeah.
And someone said to me at the Benambra Drive, what's his name? I said, Rice Pudding. And he was... And they got announced, and Ian Gibson riding Rice Pudding. That's what he was upset about. And I never had a clue where that came from.
Oh dear.
And he was known as Rice Pudding from now on. However, it's been going for a long while now, and it's going better than ever, so
40 years.
what more could we be proud of?
Yeah.
A handful of people have started and got it going. They're not all here now, but I'm still here. Ron's still here. Owen's still here. Yeah. And Krista.
Well,
Yes.
we were going to the Mansfield draft, and that was on annually at the football ground, at the showgrounds. And we went to the Tumut draft for a couple of years. And then there was a meeting called at the CWA Hall in Bensdale for the Stock Horse branch to start up. And at that Stock Horse branch inaugural meeting, a few of us decided it was a good opportunity to start up the Camp Drafting Association. So we did, and Owen Waller was president, I was secretary, and we affiliated ourselves with the Southern Camp Drafting Association, which was based in Tumut. And I can't tell you who the president was. Anyway, so in our heyday, I think we had 7 or maybe 9 drafts here, and monies from those drafts went per rider per entry to the Southern Camp Drafting Association. So we were really stacking their coffers. But that was good. And we would go up to their annual general meeting, and they used to have a dinner and a presentation and a dance, and it was all very nice. Actually, that's when John and Janice Coates got together, and we could sort of tell stories about them. That's interesting. Anyway, so yes, we had camp drafts at Honeysuckle Lane at Fernbank, and we had a camp draft at Homelands at Stratford. We had camp drafts at Woodside, and then later on they were down on Alistair Irving's property. And Alistair Irving was the inaugural president of the Stockhorse branch in Gippsland, and Sue White, now Sue Horsburgh Miller, was the secretary. And we all used to rock up in our cattle trucks and unload our horses at the race, at the ramp. And for the Whiteacres draft, I used to bring the cattle in from Glen Ullerdale and pick up cattle on the way in. And one year, anyway, and so they'd be run through without any fence around the arena, and there were a lot of crack-offs because people couldn't control their beast and it just went straight out. And Whiteacres was a lovely draft. We had huge pine trees in which to camp under, and we had a bit of a kiosk, and we had a couple of long drop toilets, and then we get the cattle together again and drive them back all the way to Glen Ullerdale. And the cattle that we had for the Honeysuckle Lane draft, they were cattle from Stratford that were going on their way to the Dargo High Plains cattle runs. And so that worked out very well. There were already big yards there, and we just had to put a bit more of a draft area there, a drafting yard, and a couple of toilets, and that was it. We had it. It was great. Yeah, there wasn't a committee for each draft. It was one committee. It was the one group of people who did everything except for, getting the cattle together. Whoever was local in the area would get the cattle together and organise to have them taken to the camp draft arena, which would either be by on foot, driving them, or trucking them. Yeah. And the Camp Draft Association actually was put on their feet financially at the Woodside draft because I'd organised insurance for rain, and it actually rained at the right time, and it would have been about 1976 or so, and we got $3,500, which was a huge amount then. So that stacked our coffers. Not sure what. I think that might have helped to put up the Benzel Camp Draft House. I'm not sure. I'm a bit hazy about what happened to the money. Yeah. I had a gorgeous little horse that my uncle bred. She was a park quarter horse. She was by old Grando from the northeast, out of my Auntie Frida's mare Pasha. Absolutely beautiful chestnut. Very, very good in the camp and quite good outside. Her name was Felicity. And then I had a lovely little stallion that my father bred out of one of his stock horses by Russell Bradford's horse, Bushman. And he was very consistent in camp drafting. The kids used him in the end just for a bit for camp drafting. And I had a thoroughbred called Chips, and I sold him at Benzel Sale Yards because I wanted some money, and Ron Conley bought him. He had a lot of fun on him too. That's interesting, isn't it? We probably had a different style then, but I've seen pictures of my grandfather, and he is very straight in the leg and his hands are down near the pommel. And so, there were riders all through the generations that were outstanding and neat and balanced. But who would have influenced? I can't think. I tell you, who was an absolutely gorgeous looking rider was Carol Cameron. She was a nice rider. And there were lots of people who had great techniques, and Aileen Hughes is another one. She's a really, really good rider. And I don't know, Ken Hallett was a big fellow, but he was a very neat rider, very neat rider. Well, back then it was mainly people who had experience with cattle and came from properties. And now is probably, well, the farming community, the property workers would probably be much less of a percentage. And people now don't need that experience from farms because the horsemanship is probably better than it was then by Mr. Average. And also these people who are not from cattle properties, they can gain experience and education from clinics. So, you know, the whole clinic thing has changed. We didn't have clinics, so to speak, and we practiced at home by ourselves and didn't actually go to schools. Most of us were from cattle properties. I was going to tell a story about Ken Howard had a little horse, little chestnut gelding called Lucky, and he had a lot of success on Lucky. Brilliant little horse. And my Uncle Wally, who bred the horse Felicity that I was talking about, he went to the sale and was losing bidder on this horse called Lucky, and they paid $900 $900 for him, and Uncle Wally said, "Would you have paid that much?" I said, "Oh yeah, I think so." And I often thought if I'd had the jolly horse, I wouldn't have had all that competition from Ken Howland. Yeah, one of those 7 or 9 camp drafts that the Eastern Campdrafting Association used to have was down on the Sale Morass. And at lunchtime we had a dog race. And the dog handler had to stay at one end, and a friend would take the dog up to the other end and they'd be let go, and the first one back to the owner won. The dogs were auctioned first, and we had about, I don't know, it seemed like about 15 dogs, a lot of them anyway. And one little Jack Russell didn't really get a bid, and it belonged to Andrew Sutton. Anyway, I bought the poor little thing. I didn't really think it had much chance, but he was busting to have it in the race. Anyway, they let the dogs go at one end, and everybody was calling their dogs. Anyway, a big dog fight started in the middle of it. And the more growling there was, the more dogs joined in. Anyway, Andrew's little dog came in first, and it was pretty funny. Up at the camp draft at Galantapi, which was held at Ronald Rogers' property, he had a pretty young mare. And I said, "What's its name, Ronald?" He said, "Oh, I haven't got one for you yet." He said, "What do you reckon?" I said, "Oh, what about Courage?" Because Courage beer had just come out and we were getting into it at night a bit. Not much, not like these days in the next generation. But, and I find it amusing that his kids have bred down from Old Courage, and they're still calling those descendants names of breweries and beer.
I became involved with the camp drafting when somebody suggested perhaps I would like to do the secretary's job, which I did and continued to do it for more years than I can now remember. The secretary's job has changed dramatically in the time when I started to now. Everything obviously then was done by hand with carbon paper, so it was quite an arduous task writing up all the entries in triplicate. But now with the computer system, I don't think it's quite as involved. There's obviously more entries to deal with. Okay. In the early days, each draft was done by the overall secretary. There were no committees or secretaries who took that task on. So the overall secretary of the Gippsland Campdrafting Association did every draft, which was quite a lot. Some years when we had up to 9 drafts. I think camp drafting has been a terrific sport for many families. We tried to keep it as a family sport where people could use the family horses in their various grades and competitions, and not to make it too expensive. And there are families now in their third generation who are still friends and still camp drafting, which would be the Neils, the Conleys, the Suttons, and probably others and the Boltons, and I can't really think of any others.
Hiscox,
Oh, the Hiscocks.
the Howes, Mick Howes.
The Howes, I believe, are still drafting. Coltards.
Mm.
And probably many others that I can't remember. I eventually got up the courage to go and do a bit of drafting myself in later years, which I enjoyed and had very minor success. I think that it is such a terrific sport for keeping people their sort of heads level and keeping a family connection, and probably one of the better sports that you'd find in that regard. Camp drafting has changed a great deal since the early days. Obviously John has spoken about better horses and becoming better riders and that sort of thing, but the grounds are now magnificent. They're all ploughed and they're much safer. People wear hard hats, and that was one of our instigations in the early days, which was taken very badly by other parts of the camp drafting fraternity, but Gippsland prevailed and people wear hard hats. Also in the earlier days it was a lot more laid back. We wouldn't have started before 8 o'clock. We'd stop for lunch. People used to have their own barbecues and a few beers and all the rest of it, and it's now the full days, full weekends, and it's highly professional, and I must say it is a credit to the way it's run today, but it was very different in those days. There's been many incidents over the years that have been very humorous, and I really haven't got the time, I can't remember them all to say now, but probably one of the funniest in retrospect, but not at the time, involved young Charles Conley, who he can probably thank his father for being a bit fleeter of foot than me at the time, where he might not be around. Bev, Gregory and myself were doing the bookwork, and in the back of a ute with a trailer type back with a tarp on the top of it, and at Landy's draft it was extremely wet and a lot of rain was falling through the day, and we were pretty busy and we didn't really notice what was going on, and all of a sudden gallons of water and a great deluge came pouring down over the top of Bev and I and all the bookwork. And when we let out a shriek, probably looked around, and there's dear Charles getting off down the side of the ute and belting across the arena, and I took off after him. I probably would have killed him if I'd have caught him, but Ronnie beat me to him and tied him up to the truck, which is a good place for him. Quite a few years ago, we used to have teams drafts if there were enough competitors from maybe West Gippsland, and the SCA would come down, and we'd pick a team of three adults, a lady and a junior, and quite often they'd wear a special shirt and they'd be all spick and span and tidied up, and everybody who knew Joyce Howlett knew how they presented themselves and their horses, etc. And she was very meticulous in rushing around and making sure everybody's horse looked terrific. And this particular day, Ronnie Conley was riding Auntie Jack, who was extremely notorious horse for his antics, and you could not pick his back feet up to shoe him. And with heart in mouth, I watched Joyce advancing after painting his front feet with no problem with the blacking to his back feet, And she just stopped in time, as Ronnie said. I've never been able to shoe him.
Probably the reason I started drafting, it had just got going in East Gippsland. Seems like a fun thing to do. We were chasing cattle at home on the farm, and to do it in competition sounded pretty exciting, so that's how I started in it. In the early days, the standard was nowhere near as good as it is today. We did have a handful of very good riders who were equally as good as the standard today, but that was, very few of them. And we, as Alan said, we drafted under very primitive conditions with virtually no boundaries, which was a bit of, bunting and flags and stuff. 2 horses that I had in the early days were quite handy, 2 grey mares. One was called Dancer and the other one was called Lucille. I had a lot of fun drafting those 2 mares. And we had more drafts in East Gippsland. Then we had the one out at White Acres where we started, and we had drafts at Hinnamungy. We had a draft at Buchan. There was one draft there at Hinnamungy. I remember a story there. After the draft, the blokes would be all over the racecourse buildings there drinking beer, and to get to the toilets you had to do a short walk from the building to the toilets, and you had to walk across the concrete top of the septic tank, and there was a worn track through the long grass to get there. And one of the enterprising young Armio lads thought it might be appropriate to remove the cap from the concrete tank, which they would do when they're going to clean it out. Anyway, the first person that discovered the cap wasn't there was Kenny Webb from over the other side. He was pretty upset when he put his foot down, and he never forgave us for that little incident. And I think he blamed the committee, but it wasn't the committee at all, just one of the enterprising local lads did that. But there's a few funny stories. There's a story that I liked that Lockie Campbell told me. Lockie was a great mate of mine, and Lockie used to do a lot of drafting all over the place, and he always had a couple of very good horses, and always had them in, condition good enough to take to a show. Anyway, he went to Corrion draft, and when he got there he realised when he did his unpacking he hadn't put any horse food in for his horses, so he's pretty upset about this and wondering what to do. And then he noticed that out on the arena the blokes were driving a ute with a trail behind it stacked full of loosened hay, which would have been for the cattle to feed them. So Lockie thought, very reluctantly of course because he's a very honest man, but he thought after dark he might sneak out there and, just remove one of the bales of loosened hay for the horses. So he waited till night and it was dark and everyone's back at their trucks drinking their beer, and it's pitch dark, and he wanders out to the middle of the arena where this trailer was full of hay, and he just put his hand up to grab the top bale, and a bloke stood up on top of the hay, and Lockie nearly had a heart attack. And the bloke said to him, "How many do you want?" Lockie says, "Oh, just the one." He says, "That was the first time I met Ronnie Connolly."
That's a good one.
Anyway, yes, the whole family, Phil and I had Amanda and Andrew, and they started drafting as soon as they were old enough. Like Andrew wasn't old enough when we started, but then they both went through the juniors and it was called juniors and juveniles. And I think the oldest ones were called the juveniles. Andrew did quite well, and so did Amanda. I think Amanda while she was still a junior, won the ladies for East Gippsland, and Andrew won the juniors for Gippsland and the Southern Cross in Southern Campdrafters in the same year, and then Amanda married Stephen Spinks, who's a very good camp drafter, and their 3 children all involved in drafting. They all draft very well. But Stephen Spinks, if he didn't draft fairly well, there'd be something wrong, because he was always at them. He was always at me, trying to help me improve, but he never said a word to me. And my daughter Amanda would come and tell me what to do, and I knew that she'd just got that from Stephen. But he was too polite to tell his father-in-law how to do it. Anyway, that's Stephen's a great bloke. But,
Cattle. Been around cattle all my life, droving and whatever, dealing in it.
And someone introduced you to it, or you went somewhere and saw it?
No, I just heard about camp drafting and give it a go. First draft would have been Hinnamungi.
Yep.
Back in about 1975, 6.
Okay.
On council ground on the river.
Mm.
And I heard about this camp drafting, so I went in, didn't know anything about it. And I took this horse, I took a stick with me, because he wasn't working properly. So I hit him up with a stick, and next minute I hear the whip. And my old uncle was judging, and I looked across and I said, "What the hell was that for?" And he just started a bit, he says, "You're not allowed to use the whip." So I was out the gate, and that was Canberra. That was really the first one, and then we went on from there. Well, we didn't go on from there, we gave it away, and then we heard about Hinnamungi, and we went up there and give it a go there. So, yeah, you take a lot of people. But the hard part about Hinnamungi, we used to see the same run Bolly cattle every year. Only things the horns were getting longer. Yeah, well, Charles, he's a very well-known boy, that. When him and Peter were mates at Bairnsdale draft, they were caught lighting a fire in the shearing shed on the wooden floor. Anyway, someone pulled him up for that. And we come home, give no more thought. And anyway, he was going to get a campfire going in the hay shed. We had 5,000 small squares of bales of oat and hay. Anyway, he got it going all right. It burned for 4 days, I think. And we lost a lot. The shed, the tractor, the lot. So, Charles is a very good teacher. Kids will be kids. And the other kid around the drafts I remember is Mikey Hart. He pinched all the fuel caps off the trucks and chucked them in the waterhole at Kevin Andrew draft. So these kids are pretty good. Yeah, we've been pretty lucky. We've been very lucky because all the kids have done the same sport. It looks like all the grandkids are doing the same sport. So really, it's a great family sport. That's the true family sport.
Yeah. And
the grandkids are good enough to beat you too. Yeah, I can. You're only as good as you are on the day. But the thing about it is, no matter what you win, you take it as an honour to be a part of the sport. And on those days, you feel terrific. But the next day, you're back even again with all the other fellas. Yeah. Well, the reason why I keep doing it, if I don't do that, I'll just stay home and work. So we'll do work another way. Yeah, but that's what it is, and it's good to be a part. You're in touch with your family all the time. Well, I believe that you've got to have that strong will, and gives you that desire to put that extra time in with your horse. Where you might come in and sit on your backside and watch television, well, you got a horse out there and you get a bit of passion and you go and you do things with him. And when he's does it right, you come back, you feel that much better, you feel very good. Especially if a young horse is coming up the way you want him to come up.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, it was a family job then.
Yeah.
Took all the kids and everything. Yeah, 3. County, Cloud and Rambo. They carried me.
Yeah.
Yeah, Clyde Elliott.
Yeah.
He used to watch him run, and he was very clean and clever, very good in the camp. He beat me 8 times out of 10, so you look up to those guys. Yeah, and then basically nutted out yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, Paradise Lagoons. All the best for them.
Yeah.
Big runs, big finals.
Yeah.
And all even cattle. Yeah, it was more relaxed in those days. Now it's more professional, more transport, going here, going there.
Yeah.
In those earlier days, it wasn't much of that. It's still good. It's still the same. Yeah. Open trail with 2 horses in those days. Sleep on the ground. Yeah, when we went to up north, 2 truckloads of us, Lockie Campbell and Graham Davis and so forth, 10 or so of us would go. And the funniest time I think was when we got Graham up there, it was his first year. We all as a team picked his beast and he went in and done a good cut out, round the first peg and heading to the second peg, and he just pulled up. And we were all disgusted, and we said to him, "What the hell did you do that for?" And he said, "I thought I heard the whip." And we said, "There was no whip." He said, "Well, tell you the truth." He said, "I was that nervous, if you had asked me my name, I couldn't have told you."
Creek.
Yeah, Warrigal Creek, it was a great draft because in those days all drafts we went to were great, and they still are. But they were so much different then because we had a camp at Warrigal Creek, and then when they come out the front of the camp, she was open ground, no hessian, just open paddock. Round the first peg, coming round the second peg, and if you didn't watch where you're going, you got into that rabbit warren, you would go a head over. And even though it looked covered over, there's sandy soil would give away, and next minute you'd see it. But we took it outside, and it was a joke. You know that, no one got hurt, thankfully. And I remember Warrigal Creek, we were drafting some big British white bullocks of Alistair Irving's. They were there on the Gippsland. And me being a larrikin as I was, I would miss me peg, so I thought I used to do a bit of rodeo, bulldogging, so I went down and I bulldogged it, and I broke 2 ribs doing it, just showing off. But I had to cover up and make out it didn't happen. So Warrigal Creek brings back great memories. I think in those days it was more relaxed for the simple reason the numbers were a lot less, and we could stop for lunch. We have 50 in the novice, 40 in the open, or might be 70 in the novice. You get and you just take your day in your stride, and everything was so relaxed. Today, for the committees running the drafts, getting the cattle, and so forth, you've got NLS tagging, for some areas you've got to scan them, everything. It's a credit to the people that run drafts today because of the big numbers of cattle, and unfortunately they've got to turn people back each draft. But in those other days it was an open book. And thanks to Phil, she used to do all the entries for Gippsland, do every draft. And I think it was a credit to her for what she's done. But she was part of the team. The Suttons were very up there, part of the team in those days. So yeah, that was about it, isn't it?
When we were kids, camp drafting was an extension to our work. So we were mustering and using our horses just for day-to-day work, and then we had a couple of local camp drafts that we went to, and probably only did 3 or 4 a year, and just really, it was just a continuation of our work days. So it was good. Probably at the start, Sutton's, Peter and Phil and Andrew and Amanda were just around the road from us, and they were camp drafting, we thought back then, every weekend, which was probably far from it, but they had a little setup, cut out yard and a flat, and so that's sort of how we got keen and got involved. And then competing, it was Ron Conley, he had a particular horse, Monterey, that I remember. Ronald Rogers was buying horses from the north, which we didn't know a lot about at the time, but they're still competing these days, a lot of Ronald horses. we used to have a week with Ken Howlett before he died, and that was wonderful. Grooming and etiquette was probably Ken's strongest points, and then competing was Ken Bolton locally, was always at the top of the tree. And then when we ventured to the SCA, it was probably Smiley Coleman and just watching those better competitors when we travelled. We had a really good horse only for a short time called Top Gun, but he only lasted, I had him for about 18 months. But probably my favourite and over the time would be a horse called Willoughby. So we bought him and got him going, and he finished up being very successful for us.
Yep.
Favourite draft for me would be easily Warwick. I suppose right from the very first years, the pinnacle and the yardstick was Warwick, and it took us, it was actually year 2000 when we first went there, and it was just a special place, like an old venue and a lot of history and a lot of charisma about the place. Yeah, so that'd be my favourite. Or camp drafting for us has been, and even when we were kids, was just a family release from work, and that's continued for us. You know, we'd work, you know, dairying and whatnot, and the kids would work, and that was our reward, so to speak, that we'd have a weekend, and that's what we really enjoyed. And I love the competition side of it being one-on-one, but the impact is just being together, the family together, and the friends that we've met over the time. Like, we've met some wonderful people over the years, and the people that we started drafting with, you know, the Conleys and the Suttons, and you know, the Boltons, obviously married to Bolton, but they were family friends 40 odd years ago, and they still are. And that's the impact, you know, that camp drafting had for me. Then and now, I can remember riding to our first 2 or 3 camp drafts. We'd pack up and get ready, and we rode to Ensay obviously, and compete all day, and generally we'd camp. No, we didn't. We'd ride home or get a lift for our horses to Hinnamungy. And a major journey for us was to ride to Buchan. That was going back. And then we only used to do at Bensdale, we'd do, and then we'd travel to Sale and Bunyip, so that we had to borrow a truck and do all that. So it was all the gear in and all the kids in, and so yeah, we they were the early memories. And then when Vicky and I got married, it was, you know, borrowed trucks, and we had an old petrol truck with timber sides of Graham Goddings and tarp over the top, and yeah, so we've continued on and always tried to keep improving our trucks. And this year, hopefully, yeah, we're going to a van and a truck setup. So that's, I suppose, the stepping stone. If you look back to, not that we carried our swags to the camp drafts, but it was almost back when we first started. Lots of probably the funny story I can remember was, I think it was Amanda Sutton's 18th. I'm pretty sure it was an 18th. We're at Bunyip, and there was a big campfire, and just all the friends were there. Like, you know, there was Conleys and Suttons and Boltons, and we're all just at a big fire. And Peter Sutton was probably telling a yarn or two, and Phil and Mum used to drink cask wine, and the cask wine got a bit low, and Robert Dobble had the great idea of stripping the cardboard off the cask and just had the bladder. So he had the bladder, he put the bladder down his pants and the outlet out his fly. So he was going around topping up the girls, and unbeknownst to Phil, she was in mid-conversation on the hay bales around the fire, and Robert's come round and asked Phil if she wanted to refill. So she said, yeah, no worries, and kept talking, and just held a cup up, and Robert's filling the cup. and Phil looked around and looked up and just threw everything hysterically and called him a dirty little rotter. But yeah, it was just, those are the memories, I suppose, just the fun. And I think the same night, I think it was Jim and Darcy, Neil, and I think a couple of the Bolton kids were across the orchard stealing apples at Bunyip. Maybe Con the kid might have been involved in that too. But